So let's go out there and piggyback off of the conversation we had Saturday night in regards to the Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators, Morgan Rielly and Reaves Greig altercation, I guess you could say. We did make a video going over everything that went down, and it was a pretty fun one considering the fact that the tension was building, blood was boiling, the two fan bases in the comments going to war, and hey, the Battle of Ontario, right? That's what it's all about. That's the animosity there. Years and years of history coming to play. But we did talk about this, and we didn't really make any other videos about it, so I guess we could use this video here on Monday to get everybody up to snuff and just give some updates as to the entire situation. So, the biggest thing that we had heard the day after this entire ordeal went down was that Morgan Rielly, for his cross-check to Reaves Greig after the goal was scored, is going to be having an in-person hearing. And that's set for tomorrow. We'll see what exactly the verdict is, and we'll make another video once all of the details are released. But the fact that he is scheduled for an in-person hearing means that there is a possibility that he gets suspended for over 5 games. There's a chance that Rielly really gets the hammer and the book thrown at him, and it's a lot more serious than if he had just had an on-the-phone hearing like you see some other guys get. So, with this in mind, everybody's tossing out the idea, oh, he gets 5 games, that's the minimum, he'll get more than that, whatever. And you could debate the legitimacy of giving a guy 5+ games for that kind of an act, but we had ourselves some extra comments made by Ryan Reaves and Sheldon Keefe of the Toronto Maple Leafs in response to not just the hit and the situation itself, but the actual suspension process that may be being handed out too. But before we go over to those comments, we're heading over onto the R-Leafs subreddit because Toronto Indie Fan went out there and talked about the recent segment by Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast from this morning. The first 25 minutes, they talk about the Rielly suspension. Friedman says that he thought the suspension would be 2 to 4 games, and he is baffled at the in-person hearing. Friedman talked about the suspension length for the first 5 minutes with comparable, and again, talks about how he expected 2 to 4 games at the 13-minute mark. He also talks about fan bias at about the 8-minute mark, and at the 11-minute mark says there are a lot of people on Twitter and social media saying, it's just a slap shot to an empty net, what's the big deal? And I see some of these people go into rages when somebody sends a mildly critical tweet at them. Don't tell that you're going to handle it any better than Morgan Rielly did, come on. And then the top comment says another thing Friedman mentioned was that he heard the Leafs organization is furious about the in-person hearing. Now, to piggyback off of that idea, I said this in the video 2 days ago, I'll say it again tonight, that Reaves Greig slap-shotting into the empty net, was that disrespectful? Hell yeah, but that's what makes it cool. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes sports entertaining when disrespectful things like that are done. Was a response warranted from Morgan Rielly? Absolutely. You probably make that play, you score that empty net goal 100 times, and 100 out of 100 times, you'll get one of the opposing players going out there and lambasting you for it. It's gonna happen. That's hockey. That's what makes things fun. But Morgan Rielly, in the way that he did that, was inappropriate because anytime the stick goes out there and makes head contact, you gotta suspend the guy. That's what happens. That's going to happen here. So, moving on, let's go over to the comments made by Ryan Reaves that people were clowning on quite a bit from earlier this morning. If you rewind to when I came into the league, he's probably still laying on the ice. I thought Morgan Rielly's response was appropriate. I don't see how a kid that young thinks it's appropriate to do something like that. And hey, Reaves Greig, out of all people, has always been more of an agitative pest throughout his career in junior, etc., so seeing him stir the pot in this way, oh yeah, he knows that it was inappropriate to do, 100%. He did that as an FU to the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was a slight for sure. So the response, of course, Morgan Rielly, I'd agree that a response was appropriate, just the way in which Rielly did that with the stick to the head, not the right way to go about it. So that's kind of how I feel about this situation. Ryan Reaves, though, I mean, the way he describes it, if you rewind to when I came into the league, he's probably still laying on the ice. That's kind of funny and very archaic in a way. The top reply says, yeah, that would never have happened if Ryan Reaves was on the Maple Leafs. Oh yeah, he's the only thing stopping something like this from actually happening, right? Even the Broadpack went out there and said, yeah, they're really lucky Ryan Reaves isn't on the Leafs, or he really would have messed somebody up. It's almost like he was brought onto the team to do this exact thing, and he hasn't really been doing anything. I'm pretty sure Ryan Reaves was actually playing at the end of the game too, but he didn't do much. Greg Wyszynski went out there and said this, I love when Ryan Reaves talks like he started playing in 1990 instead of 2010. Either way, we had some more comments made by Sheldon Keefe in response to the Rielly in-person hearing. I was surprised. We spend a lot of time watching pretty much every cross-check that's happened in the last number of years, and the ones that I thought were similar in nature to Morgan's were nothing close to requiring that. But at the same time, there's a history of events that happened in Toronto, and with the Leafs, they get more attention, more hype. That tends to lead to something such as this. So, to that end, not surprised. It's out of our hands, and we'll get ready to play tomorrow. So in a way, Sheldon Keefe here is acknowledging that the Toronto Maple Leafs may have more attention, more eyes placed upon them, and therefore it's easier for them, the Toronto Maple Leafs, to get in-person hearings and suspensions, whereas other players around the NHL don't get that luxury. Very interesting thought process for Keefe to go out there and call out the NHL in this way, since you're pretty much admitting that, in a way, the Toronto Maple Leafs get things happening to them that don't happen to other teams. We've seen fan sentiment in this regard explode over the past few days, saying, oh, if it wasn't Morgan Rielly, if it was somebody else on some other team that's not Toronto, then they wouldn't have had an in-person hearing. They wouldn't have been so hard against this player here. It's because the league has a bias against Toronto that they're going to go out there and do this, and I guess Keefe's point makes sense. Like, there are a lot of eyes on the Toronto Maple Leafs, super popular team, so yeah, I guess you could say that that's maybe the reason why these situations, if it was to happen to somebody in, like, Arizona or something, there may not be as many eyes, may not be as much attention, may not be the in-person hearing. But at the same time, I mean, Morgan Rielly still cross-checked a guy to the head after he scored a goal. So, circumstantially, I can understand why there is a hearing about this, but in person, yeah, that's a pretty big deal. So my question is, do you agree with everything that's going on here? In fact, Jeff Veillette had himself this post from Twitter earlier in the weekend as well. One more update to this, it turns out that the NHL site separates out misconducts and game misconducts. So I added them and minor penalties to this chart. Generally, the fewer penalties and misconducts you get, the less frequently suspended you are, with a couple of exceptions. Here's Jeff Veillette's list of NHL suspensions from 2017-18 to now. During the regular season, playoffs, no automatics or on-ice incidences. The number one team when it comes to games suspended, how many times a player has gotten suspended, is the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've had 31 plus games suspended, and if you go over to suspension lengths, there are a whole bunch of guys going out there. You could see the chart is interesting because there's like a Washington Capitals name that got 20 games in the suspension. That's Tom Wilson, most likely. But Veillette's point here, based off of the graph, is that the Toronto Maple Leafs have been the most suspended team if you account for the amount of times it happens and the amount of games. That Washington 43, number one number on the chart, is really only because of that Wilson suspension. Yeah, it's not really the same. So either way, you could very much say that this is a thing, right? So let me know your thoughts on the comment section below about the Toronto Maple Leafs response to the Morgan Rielly hearing. Keefe goes out there and talks, Reaves goes out there and talks. What are your thoughts on how the Leafs are handling this, and do you think it's appropriate, really, for them to be saying things like this in the media? I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.